Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. And welcome to Ode to the Pumpkin, an autumnal cooking series. In this video, we're going to be baking up a batch of my new go-to breakfast, these pumpkin spice protein donuts. So come on, let's do this. These pumpkin donuts a couple times now, and I think I'm kind of at a point where the recipe works really well. I'm gonna walk you through what I have for ingredients. I'm gonna be using 3 eggs, 1 container of vanilla non-fat protein yogurt. I have a half a cup of monk fruit sweetener, and then I have a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. I've tried to reduce the sugar in this. If I cut out the sugar altogether and went only with the monk fruit sweetener, I have less of a shelf life. Also, you don't get as great of a chemical reaction in the baking process. And I have 2 cups of pumpkin. Now this pumpkin was grown here in the backyard in our organic backyard garden. I have pre-processed this, boiled the pumpkin in cubes, and then froze it in 2-cup intervals. The freezing process and the thawing process separated and really broke down the extra water content. So I then threw this pumpkin into a strainer and took my spatula here and really just mashed away at it against the sides of the strainer to get any of the excess water out. Because the donut, you want to be dense, you don't want all this extra moisture. Okay, for my spices, I have 3/4 teaspoon of Chinese 5-spice. I really like the addition of the Chinese 5-spice. It is similar flavors of pumpkin spice, but it has a couple extra notes that the pumpkin spice don't have that I really like. 3/4 teaspoon pumpkin pie spice. Now, you don't have to use the Chinese 5-spice. If you want to go straight in for 1.5 teaspoons of the pumpkin spice, that's perfectly fine. And then I have 1.5 teaspoons of some table salt, 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, and then I'm going to be adding 5 scoops of my Orgain pumpkin spice latte, and I have 1 cup of all-purpose flour. Now, on the note of the protein powder that you're going to be using, I am using a protein powder that has pea protein as its base. I have tried making many things using whey protein, and whey protein is essentially a dried liquid. I know it sounds weird because it's a milk fat. It goes in, and in the baking recipe, it acts as a liquid, not as one of your flours. So using something that has a pea protein base is really the way you want to go. You can get the plain Orgain vanilla if you want to do a plain donut, or you want to flavor it non-pumpkin spice. I would recommend, though, if you are going to do a vanilla Orgain, that you go with the green one, not the blue one. Don't get the blue one with the 50 superfoods. The blue one with the 50 superfoods has a lot of kale and a lot of leafy greens, and we're back to the too much water content. I have tried Whole Foods 365 plant-based one, and that one just was not a good baking flour. For now, I'm going to set aside the flour and the protein powder, and we're going to work with our wet ingredients first, and it makes it really handy to throw all of this in the blender. This is a very quick go, so I'm going to be throwing in my pumpkin right into the blender. Now, your sugars are considered a wet ingredient. Sugars, and if you had like a butter or an oil, that's going to be considered a wet ingredient as well. You'll notice I am not using a butter or oil. So if you make 12 donuts out of this, you'll get 2.5 grams of fat, 128 calories, 26 carbs, 10.5 grams of fiber, 6.3 grams of sugar, and 9.5 grams of protein. If you'd like to reduce the fat a little more, you could probably take out an egg yolk, but you'd have to be adding in some egg whites to offset it. But 2.5 grams of fat for 128 calorie donut, I mean, this is like good going for breakfast with some protein in the mix. All right, so I'm adding in what is considered all of my wet, which is basically all of my ingredients except for the flour and protein powder at the moment. I like doing this in the blender because I'm going to be using a piping bag to pipe these into my donut tin, which is literally just, you know, it's a muffin tin in the shape of a donut, because these are cake donuts. I mean, the recipe is slightly different than your muffin. The texture of it is gonna be much more donut-like than cake-like. I'm gonna add in my baking powder, salt, and seasonings now too, because it's such a small amount that baking powder isn't gonna really do much to the rest of my wet ingredients. And I am just going to pulse this up. I like to start with my protein powder in with this mix, so I'm going to be putting in 5 scoops of this Orgain protein powder. It's really easy to change out whatever you're baking to protein version, amped up protein versions by swapping out the flour for protein powder. You just got to be using the right type of protein powder, and you also want to stay under half and half. So don't go any higher than half and half, meaning you need at least the same amount of flour to protein powder ratio. This is 5 scoops is about a cup, which is what I am 1-to-1 on the flour here. Okay, so I'm gonna add in my wet into this protein powder. Now the one thing about the protein powder is you do need to let it have some time to expand. This is similar to if you were gonna be baking whatever you're making and doing it gluten-free. If you're doing it gluten-free and you're using some sort of nut or even the rice flours, you allow that flour to expand. So after you mix things, you need a rest period. So I have not prepped my pans and I have not heated up my oven yet because I use that as my gauge for how long I let this batter set up, where I'm letting that protein powder basically hydrate. So I like to add in the protein powder first for that reason. Come in, get rid of any of those lumps. You could have done this in the blender as well, but sometimes I think the protein powder gets a bit too frothy for my liking when you put it in the blender, which is great if you're making a shake, but not so great if you are baking. Once you get working out those lumps, then you can go ahead and add in your flour and let this rest for about 15 minutes, which is basically the time it takes to preheat the oven. And I'm going to preheat my oven at 350. It's just a standard bake, 350, and these are going to go in for 15 to 20 minutes, depending on your oven. For me, 350 is actually a little hotter than most instructions. So when instructions say 350, my oven bakes things off at least 3 to 4 minutes faster, and they get a little bit browner than a recipe called for. So in my case, I will sometimes set to 325 and then end up with the same baking time. I have my Wilton pans and I'm gonna just prep them by spraying some olive oil spray into them. Now, one of the things I have learned over the years about preserving the longevity of your pans is to clean off the excess spray. I'll let this sit for a second. Then I'm going to use some paper towel to come in and clean off the excess inside and wipe around the outside edges. I have a pastry bag that I'm going to be using. I pretty much don't do a lot of piping work except for using a pastry bag every now and then to fill things. So I have a very large tip that I'm going to be putting onto my pastry bag. This is a 1A, a Wilton 1A. And any round large tip will work for you. If you need a tall cylinder, I'm just using my NutriBullet single. And then I give myself a little twist here, pop the bag into the container, and then open it up. And if you twist it at the bottom, you won't have a bunch of batter leaking out on you. All right, so this is ready to go. My oven is preheating. I'm gonna do the wipe off thing here, and then we should be piping away. Time to fill up my piping bag. I might have to do this in 2 goes, depending on how much you got going on. So if you pipe really fat ones, I can get a dozen. If you pipe them kind of 3/4 full, then you can get a little more. I was able to get 16 the first time I made these because I had no idea like how much to pipe, because I didn't know how much they were gonna rise. They were a little too thin. Shimmy it on down. Shimmy, 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 and begin my piping. The speed at which you move through the circle will determine how much you're piping in there. I think I gotta go a little bit beefier if I want to fill them all. For these little bits, I'll just take a damp finger, some water, and press them down right before I throw them in the oven. have had to like really squish out that last one when I pipe. This is mainly because if you're calorie counting, you need to see exactly how much of that recipe goes into what you're doing. Eking out that last bit. Okay, so I'm gonna take a little bit of water, damp those down, and these are going into the oven for 15 to 20 minutes-ish. All right, y'all, the donuts are out of the oven. They look awesome, and I cannot wait to eat them. Cool. They're cold, they're ready to go. You could dust these with a little bit of powdered sugar, but since I want these as a protein donut, you know, let me chew. Since these are meant to cut the calories, but still pack all of that autumn flavor, I'm gonna forego dusting mine with powdered sugar, but by all means you could do that. They also make a powdered erythritol or a powdered monk fruit that you could get and dust them with if you'd like. I have tried these once with the glaze. The glaze didn't work out so well. Aside from it adding a bunch of extra calories, it really didn't add too much to the donuts themselves. And they last a good week. You can get a good week. Make sure you keep them refrigerated, or you could even freeze them. So there you have it. Pumpkin protein donuts. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already. And stick around for more autumnal food.